Well, this is a bit different. The Turin derby. Torino at home to Juventus, drawing 1-1. And like most Juventus games I've seen this season, it was a bit of a hard watch. It wasn't the most fun I've ever had watching football games. And it's weird because Juventus, they're a very paradoxical side because they might be the most boring side that play good football. In terms of there's a lot of quality in the technical level of the side in deeper areas, but they never really seem to get the ball past the halfway line except for short little spurts. And they're also possibly the worst Invincibles I've ever seen. And it's maybe too soon to call them Invincibles. Invincibles implies they're going undefeated for an entire season. But they have drawn roughly about 1,000 games so far, won about two. I'm obviously exaggerating those numbers, but you get the point. Like, there's so much about this side which, on paper, if you remove important bits of context, look really good, but they're just not. Like, they're just really not. And I know a large group of the fan base is starting to turn against Thiago Motta already. Obviously, after his fantastic season at Bologna last year, he's come in with a bit of reputation. And I feel sorry for him in some circumstances. They have been horrifically hard done by with injuries, defensively especially. There's a reason Weston McKennie's playing at left back, which isn't a position he's known for playing. But they've also spent a lot of money. Spent a lot of money on players that really haven't worked. I'm looking at two in this midfield to begin with. I mean, they spent money on Thuram as well, but Thuram's been the best out of the three. Coop Miners and Douglas Luiz have really not hit the ground running. Nico Gonzalez is barely featured. And we're looking at players, I know there's a few loans with options to buy and such, but we're looking at Luiz, who was about 50, Coop Miners, who was upwards of about 40, 50, Gonzalez, who I think was about 30. A lot of money spent, and the performances aren't matching the outlays for Juventus, and ultimately it's not looking great for Thiago Motta, but Torino approached this match really well, and they deserve their credit as well. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to go over the Torino attacking phase first. Now, and you'll have to forgive me with some of the pronunciations of the Torino players. They're not a team I watch all the time, so there might be a few names in here that are a little bit of a struggle for me, especially the number 18. But they lined up in a 2-4-4 to start off with, which would quickly changed as they moved up the third, which, to be fair, Juventus allowed them to, because Juventus were very passive in their approach. They were in a 4-2-4/4-4-2 and would look to drop off and congest the middle of the pitch, try and block any central passes to prevent them from getting on the ball in the centre areas. Because in Ricci, who some of you may have heard of, some of you may have not, if you don't pay attention much to the Italian league, is a player that is rising through the ranks of Italian football, fantastically technically gifted holding midfielder, and one you could see at international level consistently for Italy for quite a few years, in my opinion. He's signed a new contract, I believe, so he's at least remaining at Torino until the end of the season, but this is a player that's going to get a big move in the next 6 months to a year and a half. So it was imperative that Juve stop play going through the middle of the pitch, which they did. You'd have Coop Miners and Gonzalez dropping off into the double pivot of Ricci and Linetti, with the two centre-backs and Milinkovic-Savic could join in the build-up as well to make it a three, and would occasionally go to press the player on the ball with the other dropping the pit onto the pivot on the near side, maybe Yildiz coming across if it was Linetti on the far side, and Bengula can do it on the left side if it goes up to Coco, and then drop in once the danger goes. Coop Miners can then move across to Coco, and then Juve have to readjust and reevaluate. Sometimes Thuram can come in from deep just to again shore that centre area up to make sure they don't get overly exposed in these areas. Luiz would cover the centre of the pitch in behind. And so their defensive shape, while passive, is good. The issue is with Juve defensively, and I can draw a lot of similarities between Thiago Motta and Mikel Arteta, because defensively good, drop off far too easily though when they get an advantage, and it felt like once they got that first goal, which came in like the 8th minute, they were so happy to sit off the ball and concede pressure and let Torino get up the pitch. And Torino, to be fair, aren't obsessed with playing through the thirds. They can go direct, especially with Che Adams up front, who can work centre backs, who can get across his man and really bother him and look for the aerial threat to bring others into play. And Vlasic, who can connect with the second ball. Karamo as well, who can come into the central area to receive it, and he can even be a direct option as well from the back. And he caused Savona a lot of problems with his positioning, his physicality, his technical quality with the ball at his feet. in receiving it from long. Savona just couldn't get near him. He had a really rough game up against him. And Caramau is a player that can make things happen for Torino. He's got a bit of that X factor about him. So he could take the ball under control, look to play with his teammates and help get Torino off the pitch. This would then invite the movement forward of Borna Sosa, and that could be on the outside as an overlapping fullback or in the middle if Caramau had found himself out wide to receive the ball. He could make that inverted run in between Caramau and Che Adams. So moments like this and the direct option coming from back to front could force Torino up the pitch. Juve would quickly drop off and soak up pressure in the middle of the pitch, and so I'll just readjust now to see what that would look like. And so Torino's shape would be in a sort of 2-3-2-3, and it would be with Sosa and Caramau occupying the left-hand side. Che Adams is the striker, Vlasic in the right half space, but when the ball progressed down the right, could be given a free role to come in and connect to that side, leaving Che Adams as the central striker that could occupy the two centre-backs. Lazaro out wide. Voivoda, I believe his name is how it's pronounced anyway, not Vojvoda, which I can't stop reading, would remain as the right back, Ricci as the pivot in the centre, and Linetti would move into the left back position, maintaining the shape that Sosa left and kept it a bit more balanced. Coco and Maripan as the two centre backs for Torino. And again, it would still be similar for Torino in this position. They'd look to go direct, look to try and hit the runs of Adams, of Vlasic, of Caramau, of even Sosa in these positions to try and use their verticality to hit and the physicality. Juve dealt with the physical threat of Che Adams really well. Gatti and Kalulu, both two very competent centre-backs. Absolutely missed the presence of Bremer, who's going to be out for I think the rest of the season, actually, with a pretty bad injury. And without him, they don't have the level of aggression, that just level of reading of the game, that smart defensive play. And Gatti and Kalulu have done really good jobs. It's just, you're talking about really good players to a great player in that centre of defence. And when you're a defensive side looking to sustain pressure, those moments of just reading situations to stop danger from appearing is so key. It's not a criticism of those players, it's just it highlights the difference between top players and very good players. And so, again, the physical presence of Che Adams caused them issues. Caramau, again, to Savona. And in cases where he would look to maybe get on the ball and play out to Sosa, or he pulled wide, and Savona was dragged out wide and Sosa was making the central run, it would be Douglas Luiz and Thuram filling in that defensive line and trying to plug any gaps and keeping them solid defensively. Koopmeiners and Gonzalez would drop in within Bangula, and Yildiz also just really dropping deep and compact with very little space between defence and attack. And with Torino's good player points, it was really hard for them to play through just because they had no space to really work with. I mean, Juventus played like an away side, but not a top-level away side. And, almost played to counter-attack, but they don't have counter-attacking qualities within the team. One thing that Torino did have in the locker was Ricci's passing to get him from side to side and maybe make little runs through the centre area of the pitch if the two centre midfielders dropped deep to get on the edge of the box and look creative. Passing range was on full display, I thought, in this game. I thought he was really good and showed his qualities and shows why he's a very in-demand player and a player that Italian football fans can be really excited by his rise and his prospect. Resulted in the goal from Caramel coming over to the left-hand side, using his physicality and his technical quality to move into space in the middle, laying it off to Vlasic, who, as I said, would come over onto this side. He then produced a wonderful finish in at Di Gregorio's near post, and it got Torino a well-deserved equaliser. And then they had to spend the rest of the game defending. I think they were more than happy with the point, but how did Juve approach the game from an attacking point of view? And so Juve lined up in a sort of 2-4-1-3 with Koopmeiners in between the middle four and the front three. And Torino, unlike Juve, were looking to be a lot more front-footed and a lot more aggressive in their approach to defending, where they'd go completely man-for-man in the more advanced areas, where it'd be Linetti and Ricci pushing onto the two holding midfielders, Lazaro onto McKennie, Caramau onto Savona, and Adams and Vlasic onto the two centre-backs. And it would be hard for Juve to play out in these areas. They'd almost have to try and force it to the player that's being marked going around the outside to get it up the pitch. And to be fair, if it went from the middle to the one side, then they would adjust accordingly, Torino, and especially with Samuel Ricci, who would look to drop onto Koopmeiners very quickly. If that pass could come from out to in to him, he'd drop in and make sure that lane was cut off and there was no real easy way to play into that player who could cause dangers in between the line, and they defended that excellently. Lazaro would come in from his fullback into the midfielder that was left behind, and they trap Juve onto that side of the pitch. and it would be equal to the other side. You'd still get Ricci doing that same job on Koopman as if the ball went to Juventus's left-hand side. Very efficient, very well balanced, and everyone understood their roles really well. You could occasionally get Koopmeiners dropping in to make it a bit of a midfield three. Sometimes he'd be followed by one of the centre backs if they were looking to engage. Other times it would be with just the narrowing up of that middle four for Torino and just making sure it was a little bit harder for them to find their option. And to be fair, they would start in alternating their shape a little bit, Juve. They would start offering a little bit of flexibility. One would be if they couldn't play out through the centre of the pitch and the ball went back to Di Gregorio, you'd get Savona dropping into this position here, almost like a right centre back, Kalulu as the left centre back, and then you'd get Gatti making movements forward into this area. Let's say Caramau would come up into this area. Che Adams would end up dropping a little bit into a position he wasn't entirely sure of, just because he didn't want to follow Gatti all the way back. Luiz would show for it in this area, bringing potentially Linetti up with him, and then this could mean Gatti gets the ball in these areas where he can drive the ball forward. He's got such powerful strides with the ball at his feet and can carry the ball well from defence to attack in an instant, lay the ball off to the wide players, get in the box where he can get a good shot off on himself with the crosses right. We saw it in the Manchester City game about a month or two ago, and he had a really good opportunity in the first half doing that exact same thing. And having a defender that's comfortable not just moving into midfield, but then receiving it and carrying it is a massive quality to Juve, and it did catch Torino out. And this level of flexibility did, again, look to catch out Torino in these areas, as you'd get Douglas Luiz trying to drop in between the two centre-backs to get on the ball and use his passing range to good effect. Savona would typically be the deeper fullback. You'd get McKennie moving forward, and the reason you get McKennie moving forward is moving into a centre midfield position where he's most comfortable. You could get Thuram maybe coming out into this position here to try and receive the ball free and use a level of fluidity and flexibility to beat that Torino press and find options outside to manoeuvre and pull it apart and create openings. To be fair to Torino, they were disciplined. They kept their shape really well at points. And while they were beaten the odd time, I didn't feel like it was a systemic issue where they were getting absolutely carved open time and time again. They'd pass off markers when they needed to. So let's say if the McKennie and Thuram switch would happen and Lazaro would quickly move back onto Thuram in the more natural left-back position, Ricci would come across, Vlasic would come across into this area, Che Adams and Caramau and Linetti would narrow up and try and trap them onto that side of the pitch again, as they were doing before. I'm going to highlight a similarity between Thiago Motta and Mikel Arteta again. One thing that Mikel Arteta defenders, and I don't want to use the term defenders, like I'm not a fan of Arteta's and I don't rate him because I do, but the one thing I always hear is that he has a level of control with his teams, and part of football is about having control, and that's right. That's not wrong by any means. But you have to also be able to have an attacking threat with that control. Having control in your own half, brilliant. How do you get from that half to the opposition's box, though? And to do that, you need direct transitional attacking threats. City are the best possession side in the world, or have been, over the Pep Guardiola era. They still went and got Erling Haaland to be able to have that direct option to go from back to front when they needed to. In their pulp, they had Raheem Sterling doing it. They have Savinho and Doku in the team to play that role. All right, been a bit mixed since they've joined the club, but it's clear they know they need that transitional threat, that direct option to get in behind. Arteta fails with it at Arsenal. Juve do not have it in these players. Yildiz and Mbangula are two really good players. Conceição has looked really good for Juventus this season, but they're not transitional threats. They're players that want the ball to feet always so they can use their top-tier dribbling qualities to attack a fullback one-on-one and create space that way in more advanced areas. Find the ball in tight areas as well to manoeuvre out, create a bit of space where they could either get a shot off or create for another teammate. Gonzalez is a little bit different. He has that transitional threat ability, but he was playing as the striker and he was playing in a role which I think he did his best with, but it still wasn't, I don't think, what Juve needed for that system. And again, like you see with Arteta's Arsenal sometimes, Mbangula and Yildiz would come in so deep to look to get on the ball in these build-up areas and help overload the centre to play out. They'd be tracked by their fullback. And if you look at this now, how many players are deep in this Juve build-up area? How do you expect to get from this position into the box without that direct attacking threat? Which is why I'm a big proponent of Timothy Weah being in the team. Is he better than any of these players currently playing? No, he's a frustrating player. I think that's fair to say. but he gives you what you need to turn defence into an attack. He's a counter-attacking player. He's direct. He won't care about having the ball to feet. He'll look for it in behind. And I just think sometimes you need that, even if the quality isn't at the level you need it to be. That is something you have to have in a team. You have to have an element of that, especially in a world where teams press, in a world where you look to gain control on it. Control without an attacking threat is meaningless. It's sideways passes, it's possession in your own half. Who cares? And to be fair, it also helps that the players entrusted in having the technical quality of getting them up the pitch as well. A bit underwhelming, as I've said. I thought Coop Miners was meh again. I thought he struggled to get on the ball and create and look for the ball on the half turn and beat the press of Torino and get forward. Did it the odd time, but not as much as needed to sustain an attacking threat for Juve. Luis got in between the two centre backs and pulled off a few good passes, but again, nothing like that was line breaking, nothing with quality, and those two combinations aren't helping Juve out of the minute, and it's making them a really poor goal threat. And the ball could come up from deeper areas to Gonzalez, who would try and play with his back to goal and then look for the runs of the supporting players of Mbangula, of Yildiz to try and attack and get in behind that Torino shape. And he did a good job, to be fair, Gonzalez, but it's clear that's not his role. It's clear he's not comfortable with it. And when they did force Torino back, Torino would end up dropping into a 5-4-1 with Lazaro dropping in from his right mid position to right back, right wing back to track any runs of any overlapping or underlapping fullbacks, which Juve would look to commit to these attacking areas. Gonzalez staying as the central figure, Coop Miners and Yildiz or Mbangula coming into the half spaces. Savona and McKennie coming up from the fullback areas as well. It could even turn into a 3-1-6 if they had prolonged, sustained periods of possession, which they did a lot in the second half. Luis would be more typical to drop into the defensive area to get on the ball and use his passing from deep to try and open them up. This flexibility did cause some issues for Torino, but nothing that resulted in any clear-cut opportunities. You'd sometimes get Mbangula coming over into this area here if Savona hadn't come up yet and was staying back as that sort of third man in the defensive unit, with then Coop Miners filling in at left in the left half space, and these two could play off each other. And that, I thought, was the real danger for Juve, was these two getting their link up going, attacking the half space, using their technical quality to exploit whatever they could find in that Torino shape. Torino were very compact, very deep there. They defended excellently in their unit. And it just took an absolute moment of magic from Kenan Yildiz to open up, get onto his left, which is supposedly his weaker foot, and fire a lovely effort into the near bottom corner. And that was the only real danger that Juve had, that I could see them carving open Torino from. That link up, I was surprised to see Mbangula getting subbed off, to be honest. I thought he was really good on the day. But there we go. It just adds to the lack of real attacking threat that Juve have. They're not set up to translate dominant parts of their game into clear goal scoring opportunities. It's going to result in what should be, for their level, 2 or 3 goals a game. You're relying on individual qualities of players that want the ball to their feet, and that isn't sustainable, I don't think, in the modern era. It can help get you out of ruts, but it's not going to lift you to where they want to be, which was challenging for league titles consistently and building on that. There's still a young team here. There's still something to be developed, but it reminds me of when people would try and discredit the Invincibles Arsenal accomplishment by going, but to be fair, you could draw 38 games and be undefeated. And I always thought that was a bit of a silly argument, but Juve are doing their best to see how well that holds up. And we'll see how it goes. I mean, the only issue I think will come from Thiago Motta is that first loss. That first loss, how do they respond from it? Because if they start losing games, that's an issue. That could be a big issue, because then you've got to start translating some of those draws into wins. If you're going to lose it on the loss front, you've got to turn more of those draws into wins as well. And it's got to be a more positive number for wins. And I don't know if they have the quality to do that. And they're getting lucky in a few games as well. But we'll see what the future holds. I'd love to know what you guys think. Like the video if you like it, dislike it if you disliked it, comment down below, tell me why either way, and subscribe if you want to see more. In a bit, lads.